I want to start off by acknowledging the Sonoma County Water Agency, our sponsor for this speaker series. We could not do this without their support, so a big thank you to the Water Agency. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce this evening's speaker. Christopher Peck is also affectionately known as the Affable Advisor. Got that off of his website. And he is a 2009 Fellow of the Leadership Institute. He is a managing partner of Natural Investments LLC, which is, I just recently learned this evening, one of the founding B Corps in the nation. So that's really awesome. And we can ask him more questions about that if you want to learn more about that. It's a sustainable investing firm with 9 offices in 8 states around the country. And along with their clients, they are at the forefront of the movement to a more just, sane, and ecologically responsible form of investing. He's also a newly published author. Along with Hal Brill and Michael Kramer, he co-authored a book entitled The Resilient Investor, A Plan for Your Life, Not Just Your Money, published in 2015 by Barrett Kohler, which is also a B Corporation, and there are copies for sale at the back of the room. So you can obtain one of those this evening. I think I have a lot of learning to do about this topic, and I'm looking forward to reading the book. Christopher worked for many years as a permaculture teacher, designer, and curriculum developer before transitioning to financial planning and investment advising. He has served continuously on the board of at least one nonprofit organization since 1994, first with Permaculture Drylands Institute, then with Holistic Management International, and he currently serves on the board of Daily Acts organization. Christopher and his family are about halfway through a deep green retrofit of their home in Windsor while developing the property as a model of regenerative design. And most importantly, Christopher and his wife Genevieve Taylor, who are both active Leadership Institute fellows, are raising their son Torin. So there will be time for questions at the end. I know that you'll see little white cards on your chairs. Christopher has let me know that he would like this to be sort of a more informal conversation with you all, so don't worry about writing down questions on the cards. You can take notes on those or whatever you'd like to do with those. And please help me welcome Christopher Peck.
Do you need me to speak into this for the video? Okay. Is it okay if I sit here? Everyone can see me all right? You know that game where you're in classes and you're like, you have to line up with every person in the room? So what I was thinking I would do is I will read a few sections and from the book, and then I'll just go through this brief presentation, which is a little bit of the aha moment of how we kind of came up with the central premise of the book and the thing that we developed, this map, the expanded understanding of investing. So that probably will all in take 25 to 30 minutes or so, and then questions. And I really like talking and doing questions and stuff, so don't feel shy about asking anything. But yeah, maybe I'll read and then do that, and then we'll do questions if that's all right. So I'll start from the introduction, standing up to uncertainty. Does the challenge of making informed decisions about your life seem far more complex today than it did even a short time ago? Does the future, your own and that of the world, feel highly uncertain, perhaps even precarious? We can sense you there, nodding in agreement. We would also wager that you would love to have a crystal ball that could tell you how the future will unfold, enabling you to make prescient decisions as you glide through life. Indeed, much of today's media aims to quench that thirst for guidance, projecting a steady stream of experts onto our screens, each of whom is rife with insight to help us understand how things will unfold. And we lap it up, even though we have seen all too often how their predictions are mocked by the actual turn of events. So we need to say right here at the outset that you've just picked up a book that is not going to tell you what's going to happen this year or next. It would certainly be much easier to market a book that reveals our, quote, 3 smart money secrets. Everyone's a winner. Once in a great while, those sorts of books guess right, but we cannot, in good conscience, make that pitch for one simple reason. The future has yet to be written. There are no simple formulas that can be relied on in this complex and unpredictable world. The good news is that this book offers something even more valuable, a dynamic framework that will help you navigate the stormy times in which we live. The tools we offer are designed to keep you nimble, which you'll need to be as the ground continues to shift. Because although we cannot tell you how things will change, we do know that they will change. Although humanity has faced immense challenges before, the sense that things really are different this time is one that is shared by the United States military. They coined the acronym VUCA, V-U-C-A, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Interestingly, they started using this term before the 9/11 attacks, Superstorm Sandy, the financial meltdown, and all the other events that have pummeled us in this fledgling century. At the same time, forward-looking companies have turned the complexity of our times into opportunities. Fast Company calls this the age of flux, quote, defined more by fluidity than by any new settled paradigm. If there's one consistent pattern, it's that there is no pattern. It's ironic that in these turbulent times, when we most crave a roadmap to show us where we're going, our visibility into the future is most limited. It's like trying to drive through a thick fog and realizing that no one has invented a fog light that really works, and the maps we have are useless because we cannot see the signs. Many investors swerved to the side of the roads, stopping wherever they were as the fog rolled in. They bailed on Wall Street, but don't have a clue about what to do next. Even while the Dow was steadily climbing after the crash, individual investors kept yanking money out of the stock market mutual funds right through 2012. Much of that cash has been parked in today's version of a mattress, bank accounts earning such minuscule interest that they do not begin to keep up with inflation or even bank fees. Stung by previous declines and bewildered by today's complexity and uncertainty, it's too easy for investors to imagine falling into a giant pothole if they take their foot off the brake. Others, with a stiff upper lip, kept driving just as they did before. They stayed true to their investment discipline, and despite bone-jarring earthquakes, two of the worst bear markets in modern U.S. history occurred within the first decade of this century, they stayed on the road, followed all the rules, and actually, as of this writing and of this reading, are feeling somewhat vindicated as the market did come back. Probe a little deeper, however, and you'll rarely find anyone who's confident that things have returned to normal. The wisely used term new normal implies that the old rules about how to be a successful investor may no longer apply, and that we need to fundamentally rethink our assumptions about economic growth. Even with the strong bounce of 2009 to 2014, overall stock market returns since the peak of 2000 are measly by historical standards. As of about a year ago, real returns after inflation for the S&P 500 were just 1.2% annualized. That's before fees, I say as someone who charges fees. This book is for both kinds of investors, the ones shivering in their parked cars, waiting for the fog to lift, and the ones on cruise control, telling themselves that everything is fine, but unable to tune out the disturbing news that keeps intruding on the hour. Of course, most of us can relate to each of them. Some days we jump behind the wheel and crank up the tunes, just like the old days, but other times, perhaps after seeing too much carnage along the highway or hearing about an approaching storm, we hunker down and stay put. Wherever you have been, our focus here is on helping you get where you want to go. To guide your way forward, this book offers a pairing of two central ideas, resiliency and embracing an expanded view of what it means to invest. The first, resiliency, offers an invaluable set of principles that can guide our decisions in this fast-changing world, keeping us responsive in the decades to come. The second arises from our experiences as investment advisors, through which we have come to appreciate the pivotal role that investing plays in shaping the wholeness of our lives and our collective future. By weaving together these two essential themes, we developed the framework that you're about to learn, resilient investing. This toolkit can help you build a life in accordance with your dreams, no matter what the future may bring. With it, you'll learn how to take action, stand up to uncertainty, and stay flexible. Resiliency. There's a new word in town, and its name is resilience. It came out of the blue and unseated the reigning champion, sustainability, which, as many had noted, was getting kind of soft. Barbie now comes in, quote, sustainable packaging. Everywhere we look, resilience is poking in its fresh new face in economics, climate science, leadership, online security, community planning, and psychology. Actually, that's a place where it's been in common usage for some time. Amazingly, in these partisan times, it has managed to span the ideological spectrum. The Post-Carbon Institute recently launched a companion website, resilience.org, while the World Economic Forum in Davos jumped on the bandwagon by focusing its 2013 conference on, quote, resilient dynamism. If resilient science speaks simultaneously to relocalization activists in their transition towns, as well as the 1% gathered in their enclaves, we should clearly be paying attention. Let's look at what is meant by resilience and why it has arisen from so many quarters as a concept that is truly emblematic of our times. Andrew Zolli's 2012 book, Resilience, Why Things Bounce Back, frames resilience as, quote, the capacity of a system, enterprise, or a person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. Zolli sees resilience as an essential skill in an age of unforeseeable disruption and volatility. A unifying and powerful lens, resilience can focus our awareness and actions at all levels for individuals, businesses, communities, nations, and the entire planet. Many people become aware of the importance of resiliency only after a disaster. Do an online search for Hurricane Sandy resiliency, and you'll find numerous articles and conferences convened as decision makers tried to figure out what we could learn from this superstorm and how we might rebuild in ways that will leave people less vulnerable. But the time to focus on resilience is before disaster strikes. In 2014, President Obama proposed a $1 billion resiliency fund to help communities protect themselves from climate change impacts such as floods, drought, and wildfires. Futurists and systems theorists are having a heyday, creating a menagerie of frameworks describing resilience. But it really doesn't need to be a difficult concept. We see it all around us. Everyone over 40 knows that we are not as physically resilient as we used to be. Injured children recover more quickly than injured grandparents. Healthy ecosystems bounce back from fires and storms better than the degraded ecosystems. Technology companies become irrelevant if they fail to respond decisively when circumstances change. Perhaps the most striking example is Kodak. Kodak, once synonymous with the very idea of photography, but left in the dust by the shift to digital imaging. For those with a strong bent on ensuring that we maintain the viability of the biosphere, it's worth taking a moment to see why resilience is starting to displace sustainability as an organizing concept. Zolli points out that sustainability tries to come up with a kind of an equilibrium point in which a system stays in balance, but this is counter to how many natural and human systems operate. As architect and systems thinker William McDonough Riley asks, who simply wants a sustainable marriage? Resilience does rely on the principles of sustainability. Unsustainable investments weaken the capacity of a system to maintain integrity, but it strives for a healthy dynamism rather than stasis. The lens of resilience makes us more cognizant that for better or worse, we've entered the age of the Anthropocene, a new term for a geological age in which humans have become the dominant factor shaping the world. Natural systems have been damaged to such a degree that we need to be prepared for random, extreme disruptions. At the same time, resilience points out that we should be designing our systems and our lives so they do more than survive. We will want to, quote, capture the upside, thriving and growing when exposed to volatility and disorder, while also seizing emerging new opportunities as they come into view. For some, resilience has the flavor of hunkering down, waiting for disaster to hit and coming out unscathed. That's not a very juicy way to live, and it's not what we mean by resilience. Our goal as investors is to make things better for ourselves and for the world. We are using resiliency in its most flexible and optimistic form, still loyal to the goals of sustainability, that is, providing for the needs of the present without harming the future, and with eyes staying sharp for emerging prospects. Here is our new and improved definition. Resilience helps us thrive by anticipating and preparing for disturbance, improving the capacity to withstand shocks, rebuilding as necessary, and adapting and evolving when possible. Resilience is a powerful remedy for our uncertain times. It helps us learn to live with the fundamental complexity of modern life. When the inevitable disruptions do hit the system, resilient investors will have the best possible shock absorbers to minimize being rattled and will be positioned to bounce back even better than before. Our favorite one-liner comes from Harvard business professor Rosebeth Moss-Kanter, who said, "When surprises are the new normal, resilience is the new skill." Why would you want to be a resilient investor? Many people are motivated by the desire to be as prepared as possible for an uncertain future, but they recognize that this is no easy task. We'll encourage you to take a big picture view of the world and consider the many ways that the future could unfold. You will want to envision where you would like to be, both going in the near term and in the years to come, and to keep abreast of the wide and growing range of investment choices available. By thinking in this broad, creative way, resilient investing gives you the tools to design a personalized plan. This will show you where you're currently investing your time and money, highlight areas that you might be over or underemphasizing, and provide the guidance you will need to move forward in your chosen directions. As you put your plan into action, you will notice a newfound sense of calm, one that rests on the knowledge that you have taken measured steps to future-proof your life and are ready to ride out the inevitable storms and surprises that come your way. You cannot eliminate risk, but you can dial down your stress level and have more peace of mind from knowing that you're prepared. Having a comprehensive and diverse set of investments will provide genuine benefits when one or another market you have invested in has a downturn, whether it's a sudden drop in the Dow, a dry spell that decreases yields in your garden or regional food network, or an unexpected health challenge. While it's always painful to suffer a hit in one area, investments in other zones will likely be doing better and help carry you through. We would be remiss if we didn't mention that this broader approach to investing, one that elevates goals such as fulfillment and meaning, can also bring benefits to your financial bottom line. Yes, making money and stewarding it well is very much a part of the picture. Resilience focuses your selection of financial instruments toward ones that are most relevant to these times, and it brings new investment opportunities onto your radar. In your daily life, it can also serve you in more fundamental ways. Its big picture lens helps you avert short-sighted mistakes, and it excels at pointing out ways to reduce expenses while increasing happiness. Another key benefit of this framework is that it's designed to keep you flexible and adaptable. Part of the process is to regularly revisit and revise your plan. If there's an unforeseen event, resilient investors find a way to learn from the experience and emerge smarter and stronger. Think of a redwood tree. After a fire, it grows even sturdier and releases its seeds into the rich soil left behind. But even if disaster never strikes, resilient investing is smart investing. Its forward-looking approach helps you identify and seize new opportunities that others may miss. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, as you move through this book and take steps to boost your personal resilience, you will also be fostering resilience in our communities, our economy, and our environment. That's a familiar phrase, huh? The beauty of this approach is that the strategies that best prepare you and your family for a range of future scenarios are inherently beneficial to the systems upon which civilization and all life depend. Resilient investors strive to stay abreast of the changing world and participate in constructive ways wherever it goes, to be part of the breakthroughs to a sustainable future, to prosper in a world that is muddling through, and have foundations for sustenance and happiness in place if things start to crumble around us. While this resilient adaptability is central to effective personal decision-making, it also enhances our collective ability to successfully traverse these times. Okay. I have a section in the back in case I get an encore. I don't think I'll read that right now. So I'm going to go ahead to chapter 6 and read a little piece from it. It's called Be Ready for Anything, Qualities of the Resilient Investor, Scenario Planning, and Plausible Futures. Just a couple pages. Ready for anything. To some that may sound daunting, while others hear a clarion call to great adventure. It's a bit of both, hearkening to the old saying, some say curse, may you live in interesting times. Clearly the complexity and the uncertainty of our times are handing this to us in spades. Being ready for anything requires flexibility and centeredness. We'll point you toward mindsets and practices that may help you face the challenges with confidence. Then we'll soar high for a bird's eye view of the 4 scenarios that we previewed in the first chapter to see how the interesting aspect of today's world could play out. Clear-minded consideration of the full spectrum of possible futures is an essential step in building an effective, resilient investing plan. So the qualities of the resilient investor. We have a quote here from the Tao Te Ching, verse 22. Yield and you need not break. Bent you can straighten. Emptied you can hold. Torn you can mend. And as want can reward you, so wealth can bewilder. Aware of this, a wise man has the simple return which other men seek. We know several high-level martial artists who physically embody the principles and qualities of resilience. We can see them in our mind's eye, and perhaps sharing these images with you will help illustrate the essence of resilience. Imagine a martial artist standing before you, upright but not stiff or rigid, completely relaxed and at ease. The face is calm and without tension or anger. The eyes are open and soft, not focused on any one thing, but seeing anything that might be coming. 10,000 direction eyes in martial arts speak. When attackers approach, our martial artist becomes even more relaxed, moving easily, staying fluid and loose, avoiding strikes and kicks most of the time. Nobody's perfect, so when strikes land, our agile artist absorbs them with breath and flexibility, always moving, head loose and rotating, eyes clear but not focused on a single point, seeing the whole room, light on the feet, advancing and retreating in a dance with the attackers. And then there are more challengers, and the artist stays calm and collected, breathing faster now but still softly, moving with gentle precision, landing blows in unanticipated places with no forced logic or obvious reason, and all the more devastating for it, weaving and dodging, able to go softly to the ground when caught by a blow, to roll and return to balance, to move where forces lead, to be led but also to not lose one's center and grounding and bodily alignment and structure, moving, never settling in a rigid position, but staying flexible and in motion to minimize shock and to keep seeking a better position. Can you feel a bit of the kinesthetic experience we're describing? This dynamic centeredness and responsiveness gets to the heart of what it means to engage our worlds in ways that foster resilience. Tomorrow's most successful investors will spend these times surveying the terrain, seeking out the most promising new directions, and poised to adapt to new challenges. Because this landscape is ever-changing, investment pathfinders will need a high degree of flexibility and versatility. To do this, you want to reflect on and strengthen your inner resources. The resilient mindset does not emerge fully formed. It arises from a range of subtler perspectives that, taken together, provide the clarity and focus you'll need in order to thrive as a resilient investor. I like to read that little part because, well, partly because I wrote that part, but I think it's unusual for an investment book to have anything about martial arts in it, so I like to point that out. So, I think we'll go quickly through this because some of the parts are redundant. So, keep going. So I mentioned all of those except investing, and I'm just going to, let's just keep going. I'll rest on this point for a second. The VUCA, I really like this because it sounds kind of a little bit violent almost, that acronym, the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. I think it really sums up a lot of that uncertainty, that feeling, that kind of the, I just heard someone say on the radio this afternoon about the fog of war, these 4 weathermen that were on a ship in World War II that was sunk by a German U-boat, and they finally got Purple Hearts, these 4 weathermen. Today, they got awarded, and that's kind of a long time. But someone said that phrase, and they kind of got lost in the fog of war. And I think there's a little bit of that happens for investors, a little bit of the fog of uncertainty, the fog of VUCA. The things are it's so hard to know what's coming. These pieces are obviously interrelated, the complexity. And one of the things I like to point out about complexity is that word doesn't mean just there's a lot of pieces. It means that when you push on the pieces, you don't know how those pieces will react. One of the things of complexity mathematics, the realization, the first realizations that the mathematicians had about that was when they were playing around with mapping and predicting the weather. And they had these very simple formula that were used to do that. And one of the things that was kind of the aha moment for them was when they, you put a number into this formula, like 2, and that makes a certain graph, like up and down, up and down, down, up, 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 or something. But if you put 1.99999, into the same thing, you would expect it to do what? It'd look almost identical. Over time, it would get a little bit different. But these kind of formulas, you put 1.99, and it very quickly does something very, very different. Like you completely lose predictive capacity. And that's part of what complexity means, is that like even if we could possibly know all of the conditions that are existing, let's just say just in the economy, which we know is not separate from the environment or cultural political systems, but even if we could know all of those factors, knowing that even to a high degree of precision gives us no predictive capacity. Like we input something, even if it was very similar, we don't know what that will do. That's like one of these little pieces of complexity that I always like to highlight, because it's even more complex than people usually think. It's not just that there's so much stuff and it's so hard to get a grip on it. It's that even if we did have a grip, that wouldn't help. We still would be in that fog. We still would be blind to what was happening. Okay, that's good. Let's keep going since I read a piece on that. I'll just say this, our definition again. The capacity to tolerate disturbance without collapsing, to withstand shocks, to rebuild as necessary, and to improve as possible. So that's that idea of not just bouncing back, but bouncing back better. One author, we had a whole section about this idea of anti-fragile. I never really liked that word, but that's sort of Taleb talked about this idea of like it's the opposite of fragile. He just called it anti-fragile. It's like the thing bounces, but that it like improves in that bounce. It's somehow like there's a learning process that happens. He calls that anti-fragile. We just wrapped that into resiliency because I think it's a better word. So, also I had to put the Boy Scout part in there with be prepared too. So, okay, let's keep going. So, myself and my co-authors were investment advisors, financial advisors. We deal with money all day long. I mean, mostly we deal with spreadsheets that talk about money all day long. And that's, for us, that's kind of the Superman point of view. That's where we're at, is thinking about stocks, bonds, the mutual funds that hold those, exchange-traded funds, and all kinds of variety of different instruments to manage that. But basically, it's about money. Going. So the next few slides, what I want to share is a little bit of that aha moment that we had, like how did we come up with this framework that I'll show you in just a moment. And it was a very organic process. We were, in 2008, 2009, we were very stressed out, as probably many of you were, and we had not only is our livelihood tied to the market, but it's like, what can we advise our clients? What are we suggesting that they do? And, there's one thing to in a way, we were vindicated by, hold on, the whole ship's not going down. We're pretty confident about, not 100% confident, but pretty confident. Turned out that was pretty much right. But still, that wasn't really satisfactory. So as part of our work was to sort of step back a little bit and ask ourselves, really, what are we advising? Like, what's the suggestion for people? So, let's go to the next slide. And one more. So, for many years, we have been advising clients to not have holdings just in strictly like the traditional, conventional financial investments. So, not just stocks, bonds, Wall Street, mutual funds, etc., but also in what we call community investing, and also what's been now developed into what's called impact investing. And we've been doing that for 20-something years, but it used to be a very small portion of what we invested in. And community investing is, probably people are familiar with Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize a few years ago. He was the one that basically developed this idea of microfinance, of lending money to people who have no money, lending money to the poor. And he developed very responsive cultural structures around that process of loaning money. So there's like lending groups, and the sums of money are very, very small in our schema, like less money than you paid to sit for the talk tonight. And almost all women, because the women were The men were farming and doing other things, drinking in the village, and the women were like the core. And it was almost all for entrepreneurship. So it's like loaning $20 to a woman in a Bangladeshi village to make a little bit more food that she sold. It's like things like that. That was the scale of it. And it was all loans, so the money was loaned out and then repaid. So that because it was such small amounts of money, it was called microfinance. Sometimes also called community investing. So for us, about 15 years ago, we decided there was a campaign that was going on called 1% for community. The idea that like investors, all socially, environmentally responsible investors ought to have like 1% of their portfolio in community investments. Like that was kind of the, people had these 1% buttons that they wore at the conference and stuff like that. And then a year or two after that, there were a whole group of people that were like, 1% is not enough, you know, like they had a new button that was pushing it. And at that conference, there was a great presentation by several folks who talked about this idea of thinking of microfinance as its own asset class. So this is like a little bit into the investment advisor nerd speak, but within this big box, we have different asset classes, like different types of assets, like different types of stocks or different types of bonds that have somewhat unique characteristics. So they get classed as their own thing. They do different things in different market conditions. We don't always know what they'll do because of that complexity thing I mentioned. But these folks were arguing that microfinance should be its own asset class too. That it has unique features, like it's different than bonds, corporate bonds, or you have all kinds of bonds, like government bonds or I don't know, 8 bazillion types of bonds. So it's really different than that. That microfinance is like its own class. And that was convincing to me. And so when I came home, I argued with my partners and said, we should do that. We used to have this questionnaire that asked, do you want community investing? Like, how much do you think you would like of that? And that was kind of a bogus question. We don't ask people like, do you want mutual funds? Do you like stocks? How much stocks do you think you should have? Like, we don't ask our clients that because that's our job. We ask you what your risk tolerance is and your time frame and all your goals, and then we just design. So we changed that and made this community investing or microfinance thing its own little sliver that pretty much everyone got. At that time, this was pretty much only for wealthy people, but wealthy people have this impact. And this is for, you know, usually private startup companies, and the impact means like there's a social and environmental impact that goes along with the investment. I'm not a huge fan of that word. It sounds a little bit like someone smacking you upside the head with a fish, but whatever. Having a good impact is a good thing. So we were doing some of that too, and so we realized we were already like kind of diversifying out of our box. And over time, those boxes became a little bit bigger. Both community and impact became a little bit larger distribution of our whole portfolios for clients. And as we went on, also we were like, oh yeah, actually we do advise clients about a lot of other assets too, like home purchase or second home or solar photovoltaic systems, like hard assets. And is that a good investment? How do you manage that? Thinking of those different pieces. And also other investments too, like education and like, should I go to graduate school, or you know, what's the cost benefit of doing that? What's the return over time? Like, so there's other kinds of assets. We were starting to have this realization. And then we slowly kind of like, oh, actually, we could kind of start to map these out a little bit. And it was kind of a little bit like a little bit of a Sudoku puzzle started to come together. Like, oh, well, interesting that, you know, several of these pieces, like, oh, there's like, these are clearly financial assets, these microfinance, impact, and the same old Wall Street stuff. And then the second row was like tangible assets, your home, a PV system. I don't know what those other boxes are. And then personal assets. So we realize that there's like, okay, there's 3 types of assets that we have. This is one way of slicing things up: financial, tangible, and personal. And then we started, in Sudoku fashion, we started kind of playing around with like, oh, well, what could that mean? I'm not sure what that's doing. So we realized like, oh, this column here is actually very close to home investments. This microfinance, community stuff, your house. Oh, and then we had the question of like, well, what's close to home? Personal. But as we went on, then we were like, oh, well, this column is global economy, and this column, let's call it evolutionary, because it's kind of at the cutting edge of what is the new and interesting thing possible. So it's a little bit of a mix. The columns are a little bit of a mix of geographic proximity as well as conceptual proximity in a sense. So either really close to me or the global economy or just really something really new and innovative and different, this evolutionary. So then when we had that, we started like, oh, okay, well, what is close to home personal? I mean, that's really me. That's like my own ability and capacity to do stuff and make some kind of change, but it's also like my community and what's happening there in the more immediate community, the kind of the we space. Health, your own personal health. I mean, everyone knows if you don't have health, you don't have anything. Health is the first wealth. Okay, so then the next one, tangible. I mean, that's all the stuff that comes to us from the global economy: cars and TVs and laptops and phones, etc. A lot of our food. And then we started filling out the rest of the boxes. So the kind of evolutionary personal, that's all those investments we make in growth, personal growth, development, kind of pushing the lifelong learning, pushing our boundaries, etc. Spiritual growth. And then this one, evolutionary tangible, was the last one that we figured out. It was really hard. There's actually not very many investments in this area. Certainly there weren't that many 4 years ago when we first started doing this. And like, what does that mean? Both tangible and evolutionary? But something like slow money, like the innovations that slow money is making in the investment world is clearly a part of that, where there's kind of a revolution going on in how to bring finance and capital into what actually are the most traditional investments, like farms, soil, trees, etc. Also things like habitat preservation, etc. That's also very innovative stuff happening. So, yeah, we kind of revised those a little bit and changed the middle one to sustainable global economy, because we're socially responsible, sustainable investment advisors. That's what we really do, is that sustainable global economy. What we realized is, this kind of came later from having this sort of aha of this map, was that there's actually another column, which we call the show me the money column, that strategy, which is not what we're into, but which is, it was so funny because when we had the kind of aha, it was like, oh, this really is like the air that we breathe, that we didn't even click on it until much later. They're like, oh yeah, right, the show me the money strategy, which is, it's all about just whatever the return is, other impacts be damned. So there's just a whole rainbow of investment opportunities now. So Investment Advisor 101, diversify. What became very obvious to everyone in 2008 and 2009 was that one of the risks that is not possible to be diversified away from financially is systemic risk. We all remember that very clearly. It was like the stock market was down, the bond market was down, the real estate market was down, like every market was down. Even the LIBOR, I don't know how familiar you are with that, but it's the London Interbank Overnight Rate, LIBOR. And you might have remembered, like, that was a huge thing. Like the LIBOR was at 6% and something. It was like, that's a bank, that's like Citibank saying to Bank of America that I don't trust you enough to loan you some money overnight, because I'm not sure if you're going to be there tomorrow. So it's like there's risk in that. I mean, like that's, I don't know how well you remember that. That was crazy. Like normally it's like 0.01%. Or do you know what it is right now, Shannon? 0.93. Okay, that's good. So very low. Right. So part of the idea of this map is that there's more options to diversify, more, literally more baskets. Like step out of that systemic risk, or at least reduce your exposure to systemic risk, and by bringing some rigor to the idea of investing in other ways. So the whole point of that is, let's go back one, is just this idea of thriving. Now, something I haven't mentioned yet is that in our book we have this idea of scenarios. So I said this idea of the fog, this like not the fog of war, but just the fog of modern life. And this has always been true, but it seems especially true to us now that we don't have predictive capacity. We can't predict the future. If someone tries to tell you they know what's going to happen, you should run away. Like that's false. They don't know that. But that doesn't mean we just throw up our hands and like, well, whatever, I don't know, something will happen. We don't do that either. And scenario planning is one of those tools that we use in our firm to help us apply some kind of thought process to thinking about what the future will be. In the book, we map out 4 scenarios, kind of on a continuum from breakdown to breakthrough. Breakdown is the kind of the Mad Max future where, civilization has completely crumbled and, we're warring over the last scraps of gasoline and canned food that we can find. Breakthrough is the Star Trek future, much more appealing. Energy, we've solved that problem. We have replicators. We can have anything we want at any time. There's no money. There's no bathrooms, but I don't know why that is. That's a different issue. But there's no money, so everyone's just following their bliss. And then in the middle, what we call muddling through, which is pretty much what we've been doing for hundreds of years. Humanity's been muddling through. Some things are progressively getting better. Some things are getting progressively worse. Is it on the whole getting a little bit better or on the whole getting a little bit worse? Well, that's kind of, so we call muddle through down or muddle through up. It sort of depends on where you're at. So our strategy is, as investment advisors who are working with clients, is like to help advise. It's not for us to tell you what you should think the future is. It's like, well, what do you think? Where are you on that spectrum? Are you more of a doomer? Are you more on the breakdown side? Are you more of a prepper? You're like, stockpiling your canned goods and your ballistic wampum? Or are you more of a spending all your time at evolutionary classes and investing in new biotech and, geeking out on Peter Diamandis' stuff? Or are you more of a muddle through person like, well, nose to the grindstone, I'm raising my kids, and et cetera. No judgment about any of those, even though we do have kind of playful names for people in different areas. But our ultimate thing is like trying to encourage people to not be too locked into their perspective. It's like one of the just fundamentals that goes along with diversification is always hedging. You're always like not totally trusting your own bias and like always like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what's going to be, but I also recognize that could be wrong. So I always want to have a little bit of a toe in other options. So the idea of the map is to help give more options, and all for the point of not just, clearly not cracking on the floor when you're dropped, but not just bouncing back, but bouncing back better. Okay? All right, that's enough of me rambling. So I don't know if that made any sense at all. I couldn't really tell. And yeah, questions or anything? And we can just leave it right there. Yeah. Yeah.
As being alternative sort of investment vehicles. What would be an example? for, like, say, personal and spiritual growth, learning and inspiration, if we were gonna say, I want some of my investment in that category, what would be, an example of how that money?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that we talk about in the book is the real point of investing. For many people, the point of investing is to just have money and then make more money and then make more money. But we know from life experience, and we know from other people's life experience over thousands of years, that that's not really fulfilling. No one gets to the end of life and wishes they'd made more money. You wish you had spent more time with your family, or that you were just happier. So really the end result of investing is actually a good life, feeling contentment about your place. Not that you don't keep trying to do more and better, but that a sense of contentment is like your pervading sense of well-being. So why not, instead of like trying to make a lot of money to then get you to the contentment point, why don't you just go to contentment? And there are many spiritual traditions that help train us to do that. And for me, meditation is what has appealed to me for many years, like that tool and practice to help do that. So, and I can say now, as an adult, a married adult who owns a company and has a 2.5-year-old son, that being able to invest the time to do that practice, it feels huge. It's a lot harder to invest 20 minutes every day than it is to invest $1,000 in a 529 plan for my son's education. It just is, because time is like the most precious thing you ever have. So many personal investments don't have a very high price tag, like of dollars, but they have a high price tag in discipline, in life rearrangement, in something. I'm saying something because I don't know that I've totally cracked the nut on how to do that in my current life situation. I remember, 15 years ago, I could spend 45 minutes every day meditating, and I would go for a hike, and it was like, great, it was easy. Well, I didn't have the same responsibilities. When you have a child, it's like, are you kidding? You don't have time to do that. If you get a shower every day, that's like a huge, check. Woohoo! Let me just ask more specifically, because you may not be in that same situation, but then it's like, well, if you were even getting started on something like that, how would you do it? And whatever your spiritual path is, going and getting started on that, go to a workshop, buy some books, it's probably not very much money, but it probably would be time. So that would be what that kind of investment would look like, I would say. I mean, it also, for many people also, there's a strong physical component to that too. So like starting a yoga practice or starting CrossFit, which is very spiritually contenting for many people, or something, whatever it is, those have, costs in terms of dollars but more time. So. Right.
Spiritual, personal growth can lead to financial investment in things that you believe in.
Right. Right.
That somehow link back up to your spiritual growth.
Right.
Help you see where to go with the dollar.
Right.
I mean, I found that personally. I'm sure you've heard of Judas said.
Right.
So, make a decision, a certain amount of money, and then I just go on there and look for, because I am interested in the championship agriculture.
Mhm.
So,
Right. Me too.
I really
Right.
and that could be, although I notice now you have to spend $25, they change their initial investment.
Right. Right. Right.
So,
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's interesting because most of our clients who are very progressive, most of those folks are folks who have been progressive for a very long time. But we occasionally have folks who are like, I just got woken up to this thing. My mother died and left me money, and there was a hugely powerful experience when she died, and all of a sudden I have something to be responsible for, and I've had a kind of ethical awakening, which sounds a little harsh, but that's what people usually say. Like, I was totally like I was a little bit of a show me the money person, and then I had this thing happen, like a relative died, and then all of a sudden I realized life is short. It's all about how you treat people. I don't want to do harm. And so there is a kind of a spiritual process there that can then lead someone to, I really have to make sure my investments line up, like the walk the talk. So, yeah. Right. Right. It's funny because in the book it's funny because we play with that idea. It's like Michael and Hal and myself have a section where we talk about like how we see ourselves on the map. Because we're not saying like, well, you should have 11% in each one and to be balanced, like that's sort of silly. But like how are we allocated? And each of us took a little bit of a different perspective on how we even applied that idea. I think for some reason I have this mental image of like, like those mixing boards that DJs use where they're like standing in the back of the room and they're like, oh, a little bit more treble, a little bit less bass. Like to me, life seems more like that. It's not like on or off. It's like there's a lot of little dials that you're kind of tuning, and it's real complex and stuff. And so to me, these kinds of things don't be like, I'm not going to be like, turn on having spiritual practice or turn it off. It's more like, what's the dial? Am I turning it up to 11 or am I leaving it at 2, knowing that I'm all about 4 because I'm remodeling my house. That's taking a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy. I was just saying about how, we don't have heat in our house, and like part of our house is like partially boarded up with plywood, It's like we're living in a ghetto shanty town kind of situation right now, which is totally fine. We're totally comfortable. No one is telling me if they're complaining about it. So yeah, I think that there's trying to find balance, and that's really one of the broader questions of life, and investment advisors can only poke at that a little bit, help you poke at that, yeah. Did you have another? Yeah?
Those boxes, except for number 8, the mutual fund ETF boxes, require liquid money. Is that right? If so, where do you recommend that money be kept while you're investing in those other?
Yeah, it's interesting because many of them, the tangible assets that to make an investment, you might start with cash. But many investments like that, you don't necessarily. Many of them are, you can make real estate exchanges, so there's no actual cash exchange happening. And many of the solar things now, you don't have to have any money out of hand. You're just leasing that. Or developments that you might make on your property, it would be very minimal cash, but a lot of time. Like installing a garden is like that, unless you're having someone do all of it for you. There's not a whole lot of money with it, for plants and et cetera, but there's quite a bit of time. So in terms of where, that's a very, we have a kind of our standard cop-out answer, which is it depends really on each person's situation. So it's hard to say like where your cash might be coming from. For many people who have, job and earned income, well then that's where your cash is coming from. But it may come from liberating other assets. It could be from selling. In a way, when I was showing that kind of the bell curve shifting between the box 8, as you said, the stock bond mutual fund, and more into micro and more into impact, that was by selling assets. For most of our clients, they're inheritors, and so they have they start with like a chunk. And so it's not like they're adding, $25,000 or $200,000 a year to their portfolio. It's like you're starting with something. So to make those transitions, we did sell, and that's why it was kind of slow over time, because we didn't just wholesale make something happen. But yeah, it's often, you have to sell some assets to buy other assets. So yeah, that would usually be the source. Yeah.
I feel that there is a pretty strong bias or stereotype that if you want true stability and true, you know, I don't know your true resiliency, but then you want to go with these true practice like the status quo approach to investing. How do you, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's the way that we all understood that for a long time, but that got totally blown out of the water in the last 15 years. I mean, even the idea of like a blue chip stock, I mean, that was like this thing. I remember when I was in high school and like studying investment stuff, it was like blue chips. I don't know who that was even, like GE or something like that. Turns out, you know, he was manipulating their cash flow anyway to have a slowly rising dividend every year. But like, we don't even have that anymore. The largest, Apple went up like 3% the day before. Like, Apple is the largest company in the world. It's like $600 billion market capitalization. Like, if anybody's a blue chip company, it should be Apple, right? But their price changes, like, could change 5% in a week. That's, you know, the first VUCA, the volatile. Like, that's an incredible level of volatility for what was, quote, you know, would be considered a blue chip idea. So that whole idea of like stability has been blown out at the micro level, like at the individual company level, but it's also been blown out because of 08, 09. We saw the whole system just imploded. Like the whole system just like, you know, like I was mentioning, fell apart. So that idea of like go with the tried and true, we don't have that. And that's true not just in the investment world and those investments, but that's also true in so many structures of the modern world. I mean, all of those things are in flux. I mean, that age of flux thing is very real. And yeah, I'm trying to think of like if somebody, you know, even now, you know, in the olden days, like 10 years ago, it's like, well, as you move into retirement, you know, you should shift your percentage of stock bonds in your portfolio because bonds are going to be much more dependable and et cetera. But I don't think anyone believes that anymore. I mean, they shouldn't if they do. I mean, every day practically there's news about what's happening at the Federal Reserve. What are those people thinking? Because it's going to do everything to us, what they're thinking. And they're making these awesome hints, you know, like next quarter we're going to consider convening a committee that will take up the question of considering when we might possibly raise, you know, it's like they're trying to hint in this whole thing so we can, you know, we're like in this very complex dance with them, like what's the Fed going to do? Because if the Fed does raise rates, then that ripples through the entire economy and all of everything changes. I mean, Shannon's business, it shifts, you know, probably not huge because it's probably going to be 1/4 percentage point, but if they go up, which they can't go down anymore, they can only go up, then what does that do to bond values? Bond values go down. So the idea of like, well, even my bond portfolio, if I'm a cautious investor, I have a lot of bonds, it's like, well, so much for that idea. So you have to be hedging. That's the reality. You have to be hedging. Because there isn't a stable like, oh, I'm just going to buy this safe investment. No such. All right.
Do you think this is true? You did just mention bonds.
Yes.
And of course, the price of buying a bond or the value of a bond you've already purchased is variable based on external conditions. But in my experience, what's not variable is the coupon payment on the bonds. And if your goal is, I'm older, so my goal is fixed income. If your goal is fixed income, do you see anything unstable with purchasing bonds so that your coupon
Well, I'm hoping you're not buying 30-year bonds, for one thing. I'm hoping you're not buying 30-year bonds, for one thing, but, well, because there's a huge amount of fluctuation in the value of those. But you're right, if all you care about is the cash flow, then it doesn't matter so much. But that phrase that you said, like, just be satisfied, that would be a complete failure in my business to just tell a client, you should just be satisfied with 2%. Well, now bond rates are at 4 or 6 or 8. Like, trying to tell someone they should just be satisfied is a very difficult sale. Now, you may have enough. Let me give actually support to your point of view. This is what people who leave Goldman Sachs do. They have $25, $50 million. They put $30 million in bond portfolio, government bond portfolio, and $10 million in houses, and $10 million in impact. Maybe not impact, but something. Because they know that the cash flow that they'll get off those government bonds will not change. They'll be totally stable. That they could live off that, even paying for the insane property taxes on their $10 million worth of houses and their lifestyle, et cetera. And then they're going to capture upside with that 10 mil, where they're also an advisor, et cetera. So that is that's a valid, smart strategy that people do. The issue is that that's actually becoming harder to do. I don't know if you were doing that during the Clinton years, but this seems crazy to mention, but there was a time when the U.S. government was running a surplus. There were no more bonds being sold. You couldn't do that strategy. You couldn't go out and buy, T-bills, T-bonds, right? So many corporate bonds, municipal bonds, also have call provisions too. This is totally getting into the nerd speak of it, but like you have theoretically a 20 or 30 year end date on it if they don't call it. So that could happen. Now, if they're paying you 1%, it's probably unlikely, and now rates are at 5, it's probably unlikely they're going to call, right? So there's issues with that. There's some positive and some negative. So just remember that there's always risk in that, whatever you do. Yes, of course.
In my actions in purchasing bonds, I did consider them.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, I just want to make one more statement. I don't really want to push this on anybody, but it has worked for me,
Right.
because I did consider call, and the yield that I get to maturity, I was satisfied with.
Right.
And 9 out of 10 times the yield that I would get to call, I was also satisfied with. And by satisfied, I mean, it took care of my responsibilities, and this is my strongest point. When taking care of my responsibilities without having to, from that point on, put time and energy into those things, what I've noticed is it's allowed me to engage myself in many more of those 9 squares than I would have been able to if I didn't.
Yeah.
So it's been successful.
Yeah. Well, it's huge because what we're always managing for is what we call risk-adjusted return. And what you're describing is probably not a super high return environment, but very low risk and very low hassle. And those two factors make a big difference. So people are generally willing to take a little bit less return if they can dramatically reduce the risk. And also, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you can dramatically reduce the hassle, because that's worth a lot. We all know that psychic space that comes from reducing hassle. So I'm not invalidating your strategy. I think it's a strategy. I think there's also challenges to it too. So certainly, one thing investment advisors, I already said once, it depends, and it depends. So there's always many factors. Should we wrap up? Yeah, 7:30.
Well, I just wanted to mention that we have reached the end of our hour, and I'm mindful that some people may need to be on their way. But please do feel free to stick around and for, a little while longer, have a glass of wine, visit with Christopher Peck, visit with each other, peruse the book, purchase the book, and will you be able to be around for?
I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, so if you do have more questions, please feel free to hang around, but I'm mindful that some people may need to take off at this point. And please mark your
you.